Welcome to another Southfield Roundtable, where we speak of issues that are really, really difficult to talk about, but we try to keep it in a warm and friendly atmosphere among people who really, really care. Today's subject, let there be peace. You will have already known by the time you see this program that the Southfield Dr. Martin Luther King Task Force and the City of Southfield will have held a candlelight vigil on Sunday, June 24th from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock at the Southfield Municipal Complex. Gun violence, either by police or those who choose to kill police or settle quarrels, this has to stop. This has to stop. So with me today are people that I am so sure are among those that are going to help make it stop. But they're going to tell some stories that you may not love, but this is what we have to do. So with me today at the round table is Barbara Talley. She's one of my favorite people. She is the co-founder of the Southfield Dr. Martin Luther King Task Force. Then we have Chief Eric Hawkins, who is the chief of our Southfield Police. Profoundly wonderful.
Thank you.
A symbol of what a police department should be. And we'll get more to that. We'll get more of that. And then we have, oh my goodness, we have one of my favorite curmudgeons in the entire universe. We have Robert Willis, who's a lawyer here in Southfield. And he, with Barbara Talley, co-founded the task force. And I look forward, oh boy, I look forward to a very exciting and interesting talk. So look at us. Look at us. One African-American woman who has fought all her adult life, probably before her adult life, against bigotry, but somehow has come to the point where she still sees peace as a given. A given. It's fascinating and wonderful. We have Robert Willis, and he has stories to tell. He certainly does. So we are so pleased. We're so pleased. It's crazy. It's crazy how happy I am to have you here. You know, our police department, it seems to me, has had a commitment, a mandate that we include the community among law and order. If I hear that word, law and order, one more time on TV, I feel I will throw a brick, because some people's idea of law and order is not what any of us would consider. So here we go. Here we go. Out of control violence. Out of control. So talk to me. I'm going to grab you, Robert, because you have tales to tell. The first thing I want to know, and you know, here I am, Madam 22% of 78% in our city, and I will never, ever, they'll call me kicking and screaming if they throw me into a community of only people that look like me. That ain't gonna happen. So you're stuck with me here in Southfield. You're stuck. So talk to us a little bit. You had some things to say, and I wanted to ask you, because you know you're going to have a different take on this. I already do. Mm-hmm. I already know that. I've heard enough of the talk. The talk. And you said something once about staying outside, playing, and when the lights went down, you know, that's another one. So continue on with what people of color, especially boys, have gone through. What are some of your takes?
I'm going to start with, I know the chief of police, and he is one of those guys I admire. But there's a thing that goes through the internet over and over, and it says that a system that is not designed to protect us cannot fail us. And so there are a number of us that believe that the entire system of policing is not designed to protect people like me, but to protect people in however you cut that cake from me. And as a result, we tend to be the person who is policed rather than sharing in anything that's positive that comes out of the police force. And I go back a long way. I grew up in the city of Detroit, and the story I shared with you was that even as a kid, I can remember my mother telling me that I had to come in by the time the street lights come on because the possibility of being shot.
Right.
And she was more afraid then of the police than anybody in the neighborhood. And in those days, the police department in Detroit had a car that was the big sedan, and it was manned by 4 police officers, and we called the big four would be the appropriate pronunciation. It was the big four. And what the big four would do is if you were in a group, they would actually drive up to you, they would jump out of the cars, open up the trunk of the cars, and they would head to the group with weapons drawn and start asking questions. What are you doing here? Why are you here? They would search you. They would do other kinds of things. That form of policing was supplanted by another group in Detroit called Stress, and that was Stop the Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets. But they too had that reputation of shooting African American men in various situations. You know, the newspaper would report, while he was running away, the police fired a warning shot twice and hit him 3 times in the back. You know, you would start reading that saying, this does not fit. So we've always seen policing as an injustice. And when we start seeing, and I think it's something that we all have to overcome, that policing is an injustice. And I'll leave it there.
You said a mouthful. I'm going to digress a minute because I never wear a hat on this show, but today I needed to wear something that would uplift us a little bit because it's been such a miserable time. This was given to me by my daughter, and she found it in a beautiful little antique place a long time ago in New Orleans. And I just felt that we needed to look at something rather nice while we're talking about this rotten stuff. So I wonder if we can jump to you, Chief, and sort of give some insight into how you, as a department, have tried to help kids like this one have a good time. Go for it.
Yeah, and you know, thank you, Uni, for having me. I appreciate being in the presence of Ms. Talley and Mr. Willis. I know them well. They're champions in this community, and they've done a lot for race relations in this community. They've done a lot to integrate our police department. They're responsible for these relations, these positive relations that we have in the city of Southfield between the police and the community. Now, Mr. Willis brings up some good points. Now, and we hear that a lot. And that is an experience that we in policing have to understand is a real experience. You know, when somebody goes through that or they see things like that, we have to be very, very sensitive to that point of view and that perspective. And we've got to be very, very careful in policing that we don't dismiss those who have a fear, a skepticism. They question policing. And so we can't get defensive about those things. So when I hear that, what that tells me is that it reinforces that those feelings are still there. Now, what can we?
And they're not very well healed either.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you can hear it. I mean, you know, it's still it's still there. So what I do and what the responsibility of police chiefs across this country should be, is to number one, acknowledge the pain and the experiences that folks have gone through with policing in this country. It's a real thing, but also to try to change that experience going forward, and that's what I am my passion right now, and that's what I feel my obligation is at this point, is to make sure that the experiences for not just Mr. Willis, but his nephews and his sons and his friends are different. And it's not something that happens overnight, you know. But we can slowly change things within policing so that going forward, those types of experiences are not so prevalent.
It's true. It's true what you're saying. I talk to a cousin of mine in Los Angeles at least twice a week, and he's he's so on the other end of the spectrum from me. I don't even know why we're friends. But he reminded me. We grew up in Cleveland. And he reminded me of the 2 police guys that patrolled our neighborhood. They walked the beat in our neighborhood every single day. So all the kids in the neighborhood knew these 2 men. So it seems that you're trying to do very much the same to heal those wounds.
Yeah, because we have to have people see policing and see officers a little different. Before, just as recently as about 20 years ago, in law enforcement, it was expected that police officers were the biggest, the strongest. They were dominant. They came in like the big foe, I think is what Mr. Willis called them.
I'm going to remember that one.
So they came in like that. I mean, and that's how we thought it should be in policing. And I don't know, maybe I wasn't in policing at that time. I don't know if that was the most effective, but I do know right now that's not the most effective way to police. It doesn't build trust. And in fact, it erodes trust in policing. And so now, and I've said it before many times, I'm not looking, we're recruiting police officers right now. We're changing the culture in the police department. And I'm not looking for the biggest, strongest, most dominant police officer right now.
So that means it's 4'10" person.
you could apply, Uni, and we'll bring you in. But I've told my recruiting staff that the most sought after quality that I want in my police officers, new prospective police officers, is interpersonal communication skills. If you can communicate with somebody, it tends to facilitate an appreciation for a person's experiences. You realize that not everybody is like I am. Not everybody came from where I came. They have different experiences. I need to take a step back and appreciate those. That's what I want in my police officers. It will minimize those types of experiences that Mr. Willis talked about. We can't, like I said, we can't take those away. I mean, those are there. He's going to live with those, and he may die with those in others in that generation, in my generation, and afterward. But I and other police chiefs have an obligation to change the experiences of folks going forward so it's more positive with policing.
Absolutely. Barbara, you were going to tell a story about what happened to you.
Well, let me go back to, I was born and raised in Detroit. Now I'm in my 80s, all right? So that's been a long time ago.
It's all right.
So when I was in the 40s, 1940s, there was what it's called a small race riot in
1943.
Detroit. 1943. And I do remember, I was in not elementary, but in middle school. My father came home and got me. And the police were all around with these guns, and he shoved me into the house. But I remember those guns. Okay, so now go forward a little bit. In California, I was in my, I guess, 50s at that time. My husband, an executive of Jack in the Box. You remember
I remember Jack in the Box.
And he had gotten a promotion, and we were going out to Anaheim, California, where he was saying farewell to one of his colleagues. On the way back, we were sitting in the car driving, and we had someone else driving. And all of a sudden, there were this talk out of a siren. Stop, get over, stop, get over. And my husband, Al, said to the driver, someone is telling you to stop and get over. He kept driving. He says, man, stop and get over. And he did. There were 8 policemen with guns, and one said, get out of the car. I had my fur jacket on, looking very nice, I thought.
I'm sure you were gorgeous.
And I was told to put my hands on top of the roof of the car. They said, where is the gun? Where is the money? I said, what are you talking about? Had my husband, like this also, had a gun up to my husband's temple. And I said, please don't shoot him. Please don't shoot him. I said, my child is at home. Please don't. Shut up.
Oh, my God.
I said, what did we do wrong? Shut up. It was so terrifying that, and what my husband was doing was thinking about me, how disgraceful it was for me. And he kept on talking. And he was told if he didn't shut up, they would kill him. That was my experience, and I never will forget it.
How did it turn out, though?
It turned out they wanted to look and see in the trunk of the car what we had in the car. There was nothing that we had in the car that was that we had stolen or anything like that. They went to the back to their car, and because it was a company car, they then made sure that they could identify that it was a company car and that we didn't steal the car. And finally they said, well, you can go.
No apology.
No apology. We did make a complaint with the police, and the police told us that yes, we were people who were thought to be robbers or something like that. I told
You
them
look just like a robber.
I told them what happened,
Horrible.
and they did not have the same report. We went to the papers at that time. Nothing happened. Nothing happened as a result of that. But you have to remember, this was in the yeah.
You said 50s.
It was.
I know you
it
were
was-
50-ish.
I was 50.
Okay.
This was 69.
Okay.
This was 1969.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I
that
don't know how you
that
recovered.
that continues when I hear the young men who one I was researching who had been stopped 58 times. 58 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I can just imagine, because I can imagine if I were stopped again, if you came up behind me, even knowing you, I would kind of do like this. It's still in my mind. So that's
Well, it never goes. How could that possibly go away?
But that,
Go for it.
unfortunately, is not a unique experience. That's an experience virtually every last one of us have gone through at one point in our life. And one of the experiences that I have today is I have a son, African American, 21 years old. I teach him in every realm to be a man, except in one situation. If the police stop you, it's the talk that I have to have with my son. If the police stop you, you have to do these. What he does is, fortunately, he's never been stopped. If a police officer stops you, as the car stops, reach in your pocket, pull out your wallet, put it on the dashboard, show both hands. If the police officer asks you for anything, you say, yes, my wallet is right here. Can I give you my driver's license right here? I told him there's nothing he could do to show aggressive behavior. The only thing I want to do is for him to get home. If that police officer abuses him, if he uses language, no adult man wants to be called what can be called. If they use the language, no matter what it is, his restatement is going to be, officer, may I please call my dad? The one thing I did that's a little different is I'm concerned with police officers with search and seizure. If they say, can I go into the trunk of your car? The one statement today is, that is not my car. My dad would not let you go into my car. That is the only statement. And the reason we do that is because there were so many cases that would go to criminal court with, as we had permission to go into the car, we found these drugs. And this person now has this glassine envelope filled with 0.2 ounces of heroin, and now we're going to charge him with possession. And so you do things to protect your son, but I'm almost resentful that I have to give that lesson to my son because he's a black male.
As a matter of fact, somebody told me this past week that she resents it terribly. She said it should not be her job. It should not have to happen. It should not be hers. She resents and she has not done it. She will not give that talk because it angers her to have to do it. That's fascinating, and I hope her kid's going to be okay.
And I see it very differently because not all the police departments are local. So I love the police force in the city of Southfield. I may not love the police force in West Bloomfield. I may not love the police force that's 40 miles up the road up I-75.
Oh, for sure
And in
you
those situations, again, I want my son to come home. And in every situation, you're going to hold on to your dignity. You're going to hold on to your self-respect. But when that police officer gets there, you are going to comply with whatever he says. You are going to be as humble. You're going to be as passive. You're going to do everything he says. Because again, all I want you to do is come home.
Get home. I was telling Rob earlier that I saw an interview with a guy named Brian
Garner?
That's,
Garner?
No, Brian Stevenson.
Brian Stevenson. Okay.
Aha!
You can't do that.
I got you. I got it. Brian Stevenson is a guy who formed a group to help incarcerated black kids.
After conviction.
After conviction, yes, and it was really bad. I mean, but he's done a great job. And he was interviewed by Charlie Rose, who no relative, but I'm madly in love with that guy, and I really watch him, so I'll know what to do. But the thing is, the things that this man told him that I was not aware of, astonishing stuff. One of the things goes back to that 1943 riot. According to Stevenson, African Americans, or they weren't called that then, but they came from the South, not necessarily to get jobs, which was very interesting, but to run away from the horror in which they were living. And then they came, and it really shocked the heck out of me, and it really made me angry that they thought they found a place to be, and it happened all over again. That makes me crazy. It just does. So believe me, I've got reams of material about this guy, but we don't have the time. But I was glued. I was glued because when he made that statement that they didn't come here for work, they came here to get away from what was going on in their lives that had never gotten any better, only to come here and find this.
We used expressions to, one was that we're up south.
You're
rather
up
than-
south. Okay. Okay.
And
Yeah.
in the metropolitan Detroit area, it seemed to focus on housing more than anything else.
Yes.
The cities were absolutely segregated to a point where if you crossed the street, I remember a long time ago when one of the Supremes moved into a house on the west side of Dexter. I'm sorry. And she really moved a long way west. And we were really applauding the fact that she had the resources. Or the group that moved into a place called Conant Gardens near Pershing High School. But housing was the central issue then. And so when people of color moved, they knew that they could only live in some areas in the South, and the remaining part was strictly enforced. You could not go there.
Interestingly enough, because we talked about this and it was on our show.
What I wanted to say,
Tight.
I wanted to say also that when I was a kid and coming up, you better not go to Dearborn. To Dearborn,
Yes,
you
yes.
bet. It was the law. You could go in the daytime, but you had to be out.
Here we go with this light.
Had to be out by dusk. Everybody knew that. Hubbard said that. He told us.
He's one of my favorite people, you know.
So you have. So those are things that still are ingrained in you.
Oh, and it's not going to leave.
Yeah, no.
How can it possibly?
But
Well,
but we
the-
have to do something.
The language around it then was to have a sundown city. It was recognized that if you were a black person in certain cities after sundown, you were either addressed by the police, or you were given no protection by the police. And either way, the consequences would be bad. And you're right, Dearborn was one of those cities.
Wasn't Grosse Pointe as well?
Grosse Pointe, well,
You never got there.
no, well, the other, but
Neither did we, by the way.
But the cities in
Neither did
Macomb County were cities that we definitely had to leave.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's a whole nother ball
Another
game.
ballgame.
But the whole idea of a sundown city is even reflected today when areas you'd think, especially in the South, that would have a black population had zero black population because at some point either they migrated out of or they were forced out of because of concerted efforts by concerned citizens.
By concerns. Don't you love that concern?
Nice way
You're
of
such
putting
a
it.
good guy. Oh boy, are you a good guy.
Okay.
That's incredible, incredible. So let's jump to a lot of horror stories. Lot of horror stories. And so for you, I know you do have a network. I know that. We've talked about that. But what is it about these police departments? Is it because they're in Baton Rouge, or now I feel so horrible because 3 of them, died this past week by a crazy man that wasn't even involved in any of the
That's
Black
right.
Lives. He just was and that's another story about veterans who come back
PTSD.
incredibly, yes, horribly angry and wounded in the mind. So they do these insanity, these things of insanity. But you mentioned that you actually do have a network with other police departments, and you do talk to each other. How can you make your community more inclusive? So have you reached out to? Well, I'm sure you did this time with the horror that happened in Dallas and in Baton Rouge. So Have you talked with anybody recently, or, you know, trying to pull life together between them and their I'm going to say constituents?
Yeah, and you're right. We have a network of police chiefs across the country. We communicate frequently, more frequently with some than others. So we do that, and we've been talking about this this whole issue. You know, but I want to just step back a little bit, just to put some context to it, to some. You know, and I tell you, it's just some heartbreaking stories that I'm hearing. But it's not the first I've heard it, because you know I have a unique perspective as an African American police chief who grew up in the city of Pontiac, and which is a city that is not much different than Detroit or Saginaw or some of the other cities with large African American populations that had an economy that was just decimated by the auto companies leaving and all that. So and so that's where I grew up, and so I heard the stories that Miss Talley and Mr. Willis have told when I was growing up. You know, 'cause my father came from came from the South. Just like a lot of African American families, and was here and had stories to tell. I had uncles and cousins and that who told similar stories, and I lived it. You know, so I've seen that piece of it, and I know the pain, and I know you know how it impacts individuals and families, communities. But I also have, like I said, a unique perspective, because I also get a chance to see it now from the police perspective, and to see, and it's, to me, this whole, you know, what's happening across the country is very, very interesting to me, because I can see how everybody's, you know, it's along fault lines right now, and you've got a lot of passion, a lot of anger. Just some raw emotions on both sides of this issue. You know, we have those who feel that they're being persecuted by police, by law enforcement, and they perceive the unfairness of it, and also see the law enforcement officers who feel much different. And you know, and I will say this: that not all police officers, and I think everybody agrees with this.
Absolutely.
You know, not all police officers are out there with this idea that they want to persecute and do all these bad things to certain demographic groups. In fact, I would even go much further, and I would say that the overwhelming majority of law enforcement officers don't feel that way. You know, and you can never tell what's in a person's heart.
Of course.
I mean, you know, you can have, you know, sometimes our children do things and make us scratch our heads, you know, and family members do some things. You think, well, I never would have thought such and such would have did things like. So you can never tell what's in a person's heart and what they may not do. But what I can say is that, especially to speaking with you know, because that the story about the talk, that you know, that resonates quite a bit with me as well. You know, I've got a 25-year-old son who was raised and came up in this environment, and so I had to deal with that same thing. It was a little bit different than the conversation that Mr. Willis had. You know, just because my experience is a little different now, and my perspective is a little different, and so with me, you know, to me, the police were not the biggest threat to my son. As a father, when I had to tell my son and my daughter, you know, and to give them awareness of threats in this society, what could take their lives, what are you more likely to die from in this society that we live in? From my perspective, it wasn't the police. It was other things. You know, it was getting involved in traffic accidents. I talked to my son a lot about how to drive and how to, you know, because you're 14 or 15 times more likely to die in a car accident than you are from a police officer shooting you. Not to minimize the experience in the perspective, but again, mine was just a little bit different. You know, the message I gave. And so again, I just got it. You know, it's a unique perspective that I have. And so what I'm trying to do right now, as police chief, in the position that I am right now, is to take these perspectives that I'm very, very familiar with, and to try to merge them and to bring these two sides together, so at least we can kind of see each other, and we can see that that reasonable perspectives can differ.
Yes, and that brings me to something. On an individual basis, as people to people, person to person. I've been told by my stepdaughter and her group, and they live in New Jersey, they're very close to the vest. They wouldn't talk to somebody they don't know if somebody was sticking a hatchet on their head to make them do it. So I talk to the world. I never have stopped that, no matter what color they are, no matter who they are. If I see somebody that looks interesting, that person is coming toward me, I carry on a conversation. At a supermarket, a young man was walking toward me, a young African-American guy, I would say around 18 or 19, and he was carrying some carnations. And he was coming this way, I was going that way, and I said, "Oh, those are pretty." And he stood there and he handed me the flower. I said, "Well, thank you." He said, "Because you talked to me." Oh, how could I ever forget that? So it just seems that we've got to bring it down to the personal level somehow.
I agree. I agree. And I am one like you, that I talk to everybody that I see. This morning, there was a policeman in the Kroger lot. He had his dog, and he was brushing his dog. He was brushing his dog and brushing it. And I said to him, "I should take a picture of you." Now we're walking. My husband is, and I had to stop to talk to the policeman. He was brushing his dog, and I thought that was so really nice. And I was hoping. And then there were 2 cars, police cars out there, and the police went into one of the stores. I don't know if it was Kroger's or Panera's. And I wanted to wait until the police came out so I could compliment them and talk to them.
Yes.
But my husband,
Well, husbands are like that, you know.
we had to walk.
Yes.
But I do talk a lot.
It
to people.
just seems like such a natural thing to do, human being to human being, and it breaks my heart that people are so separate from each other and so angry with each other and so afraid of each other that it drives me a little bit cuckoo, which isn't hard to do. It's not hard to do. So. Oh, we talked about Brian Stevenson, didn't we? And I really wanted to talk a little bit more about what he said, if you don't mind. And that is that he said wealth and guilt are better than poor and innocent.
Well,
Wealth and guilt are better than poor and innocent, when he talked about these kids that were incarcerated. So it didn't matter if somebody's guilty as long as they got the money, honey.
Oh, okay. I
That's
hear
what
what you're
it meant.
saying.
Okay.
Okay, that's what it meant.
Okay.
So is that, I mean, obviously it's very prevalent, otherwise he wouldn't have mentioned it.
Absolutely, money always makes a difference in a court of law. You can you can go back to the O.J. Simpson situation.
That's right.
And one of the concerns that we have about the judicial system today is we have a constitutional protection that said everyone has a right to counsel. But when you are one of 200 people this person is supposed to handle, you really have no real access to an attorney.
Exactly.
And it is that kind of thing that forces the plea bargaining. To me, it's a dishonest portion of the criminal justice system because it's more of an illusory than a real right. But I hear you. If I had money, if anybody I knew was charged with something, I would prefer to hire an attorney who could spend time with them as compared to taking one that's assigned.
Barbara.
I wanted to talk about one of the young men that was killed, the one in Baton Rouge.
Yes.
Baton Rouge.
Yes.
He had 52 stops
Yes, he did.
for infractions.
Yes.
And he $6,800. So what? $800 over a period of time.
That's a lot of money.
How in the world, in an area that is not a high scale or middle class, how can a man have that much and be expected to pay, and he doesn't make that much? But he was stopped because of muffler. He was stopped because of tailpipe. He was stopped because he did not have his license. I mean, so those are things that we have to think about as far as what would you do. Now you're here in Southfield, but if you were in Baton Rouge and stopping, would you have to stop a person that many times? And what would you do?
What I would do is make sure that my officers are properly trained. What I'm seeing in a lot of these incidents across the country is, I'm not necessarily sure that that a lot of it is racial, necessarily. I think a lot of what I'm seeing is that you have officers who are poorly trained. They're doing things that that go against what we're taught and what they should be taught in training. And so what I would do, and again, not knowing what's going on in that police department, and I'm sure they're trying to do things the right way, and I wouldn't criticize another law enforcement agency, but if I were in that position, what I would do is number one, make sure that my officers had the appropriate amount of training in how to deal with traffic stops. And training also goes to what you're trying to what you're touching about, and that is discretion. Are we using the appropriate amount of discretion with certain infractions? That's what we get here in my place. Now, and so in short, that would what I would be looking at.
I see. Well, I think you do a fine job of problem solving rather than direct intervention. I think your police department does a lot, and I've heard so many stories of how the policemen are so friendly and will stop and be friendly with people, and that goes a long way because we have the trust. And when you have the school, the liaison police that you have with the school, and you have a new program, the PAL, P-A-L.
That's not so new, though, in other communities, is it?
Except ours is a little different. Ours is Police Activity League instead of Police Athletics. So so ours is much broader. So we incorporate athletics, but we do a lot more stuff with them.
Before we go on to that, I know that you had something that you wanted to
I wanted to respond to you, Barbara. And one of the things that you talked about is the fact that this young man had been stopped over and over and over and over. I don't know the situation there, but the comparable one I can think of is in Ferguson, where they had the federal investigation afterwards. And what they showed was that these minor stops is what kept the government running. They would charge people who were unable to pay their fine over and over and over. They could make enough money for fines to pay for city services, and they use it as a way to exploit essentially poverty and then black and impoverished people, to the point where the federal government said you can no longer do this in this community. It is not an unusual practice, though, for police stops to be used as a way to fund city government. And the other notion is the court's allowance of that police discretion on the street. And it is a police officer can stop and frisk under a lot of circumstances. It is a discretion that they have, and when they do it, they can ask you to do the things necessary to protect the police officer while they are engaging in that conversation. It was taken to an extreme in the city of New York to a point where it became, I don't know what happened. It probably caused a government turnover, but it was stop and frisk every time a young man would walk down the street. You would hear reports. I've walked down this street every day, and every day the same police officer stopped and frisked me to ask me where I'm going, why I'm going there. It is the other thing that kind of escalates the conflict between people. It's the thing that escalates the violence between people, because if you're not giving the appropriate answer, sometimes it can lead to violence. Black Lives Matter is one what started asking the proponent of the really high number of stop and frisk incidents, and that was Giuliani when he was mayor. Black Lives Matter asked Giuliani, in a sense, will you stop shooting us? We're looking for justice. Will you stop shooting us? Will you stop shooting our children in the street when sometimes we're not doing anything wrong or when we're doing something minor? Giuliani's response was, maybe. If you correct yourself, if you start behaving this way, if you stop wearing hoodies, if you do this, then we'll stop shooting you. And to me, that is an untenable response, but it's one of the ones that we hear. And as a result, what you hear from one community is Those guys are not our friend. Those police officers are people I have to fear because I can't walk down the street without being stopped and frisked. I can't do anything unless I have this, this kind of
Attire.
yeah, this Gestapo regime that allowed that, and so the denial of my freedom and denial of my humanity is not only something that's evident every day, but it's court sanctioned. So Black Lives Matter is saying, please stop killing us. Let's have a justice in this judicial system that we're talking about. And the response we get from Giuliani and others like him is maybe.
Let me respond how you
Please, please.
Because I think we got to keep in context some of those tactics that Mr. Willis is talking about. We all remember back in the early '90s when crime just spiked around the country.
Yes,
And it was toward the late '80s, early '90s. We had the crack epidemic, and especially in our larger cities, crime was just off the charts. And so there was a plea from the communities back then to do something about this crime that's happening in our community. That's where some of these tactics that we see in New York arose. And so it was a response to some of those things. And now you can, depending on who you listen to, Giuliani and the police chief at that time there, they say that it was those tactics were responsible for bringing the crime rate down and saving lives and things like that.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, it was a response to communities saying, do something to help with these folks who are doing bad things in our community. And they put those, and even Mr. Willis agrees, it's not an unconstitutional tactic. I mean, stop and frisk is something that is allowable. Now how discretionary it should be is certainly a question, but if it's used appropriately, it's not something that's unconstitutional. Now, but then to follow it up, I will say that I'm very, very uncomfortable with those types of tactics right now being used to control crime, because again, it just does
Number
bad
one, it
things.
didn't work.
Well,
Did it work seriously? Did it really
it's
work?
questionable, because I mean, if you talk to police executives, especially in New York, they say it did.
Oh, okay,
I mean,
okay.
because crime did. It
worked,
just
it
dropped.
dropped.
Right after that, dramatically. And even now, it's at its lowest point in a couple decades. So maybe it did, or maybe it did, but now it just destroys the trust and confidence that you have. And that's the number. We all seen President Obama's task force recommendations.
Yes. Yes.
And the number one pillar that he had on there was building trust and confidence in communities.
Exactly.
When you have tactics like that, it just destroys that number one pillar. So I'm very, very uncomfortable with that. But I think it's got to be put into context when you talk about how it was used, a decade or a decade and a half ago.
So it means to me, frankly, that things have not gotten a heck of a lot better.
I'm not sure if I know I'm saying it kind of from one place, but I'm not sure if I'm saying it hasn't gotten better.
Okay.
Evidence
do
of
help me out here.
Evidence of it's getting better sitting to my right. He can be mad at me about some other, but he has truly evidence about
Well, that's
that
why
it is.
he walks on water.
Policing has to be a community response. I think, though, where it's focused today with the Black Lives Matter, it seems to be just a thing of saying, okay, we're back to this high point of crime, absolute police, non-police relationship. I think Black Lives Matter are bringing out a really clear flaw in the criminal justice system. I think what they're saying is that when a person in uniform kills one of our children, they do so with impunity. But the issue is, are we getting justice out of this? The person who does this, person who acts this way, will there be any consequence? So when you kill our children, and the consequence is you get suspended, then a whole lot of people send you money, and then you be wealthy. It is just the opposite. It denies our humanity.
Right.
It says that we are not entitled to justice, and that point has to be brought out, has to be focused on. And one of the things that I've seen is the police chief who are responding to it are sitting down with Black Lives Matter saying, yeah, we are understanding now, we hear you.
Yes.
It is that other voice that we hear over and over that says, this is a terrorist group, we got to shut them down.
Exactly.
That's the voice that scares me. And where it scares me is that it seems so purposeful. It seems that These are bright
They
people.
planned
They
it.
are not deaf. They are not. They are not lacking information, but they are intentionally tone deaf, not hearing the cries of this organization to say, "Oh no, they are terrorists." So we can take this other action, and I am absolutely afraid of the other actions they can take. So.
Thank you so much for that uplifting little message.
Well, just a response to that,
Yeah.
and you're absolutely right. I think police chiefs now, at least the police chiefs who are interested in resolving some of the issues that we're seeing right now, are very, very interested in that point of view.
Sure they
And
are.
they're interested in that pain, and they're interested in the experiences that those folks have. But here's what concerns me, Mr. Willis, with particularly the Black Lives Matter, and also with some of the other groups, is that they're being perceived in law enforcement right now as being anti-law enforcement. And I get it. You know, I understand that it's more of a broader issue, but the rank and file in law enforcement see some of these movements as being against them. This is an us, and it's becoming an us against them mentality. And I've sat down with members of Black Lives Matter and some of the other groups, and to them, I get the feeling that they see the police officers in general as being the them and the other side, and the ones who are doing just the bad. And so I guess what I'm saying is that what concerns me right now is that I'm seeing a lot of emotion on both sides. I'm seeing it with my officers. I'm seeing it with groups who want their voices heard. But I'm not optimistic in the near term that there's going to be some constructive dialogue because each side is seeing the other as just being so opposite and against the other.
Let me agree with you 100%. I'm not optimistic about the dialogue because of what you see in media, and that is they're a terrorist group, and what they're trying to say. They're trying to say, please don't kill our children. I think part of it is issue of messaging. Part of it is an issue of intentionally disregarding the message so that whatever other agenda can be forwarded. But one of the things that I go back to is I'm old enough to go back to the 60s. I can remember when Martin Luther King was the most dangerous man in America. I can remember when the civil rights movement was led by outside agitators and communists, that it was the most dangerous thing that ever happened in America. And the messaging was very clear. You have to stop them. And that notion of asking for freedom and dignity of the civil rights movement was one that was just an illusion. And so we had to go through exactly the same thing to assert that. And what happens with that is at some point you unfortunately wind up with a compromise. You don't realize all of the things you want, but what you'll do is you'll have some place where maybe you can quiet it down. And I'm concerned even with the quieting down. One of the words we use very frequently, Barbara, and please forgive me, is the word peace. And we use peace as, kind of an ultimate goal. But peace that is not voluntary is suppression. It is keeping me from making noise. And so peace without that, if it's not mutuality, is not one of mutual respect, then it doesn't work. And one of the problems I have with this dialogue that splits us one on one side and one on the other is ultimately we can have the peace, but if we don't have it with the human dignity, if it doesn't recognize my humanity, then it is just noise. Okay, I'm sorry.
That was perfect. Seriously. I think we probably need to wrap up a little bit. Can you believe this nonsense? But I can say this very quickly before we wrap up. First of all, you're all marvelous. I mean, seriously, folks, I'm so pleased. I had the right people at this table today. I am so pleased. And the thing is, we have to talk to each other. Those are the things that we've got to do. And the peace vigil, I'm hoping will have, if people see this afterward, I'm hoping that it will have been a success. And the other thing is that the good guys just have to win. And the thing that annoys me, and we talked about this a little bit, the media has been a real culprit in this. When it's become sensational, boy, they get a sensational story and they put that out there. They forget about people that really, 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 really have the means, and I'm talking about the spiritual means, the inside your heart means, to get beyond all this stuff and get something going that means something. That means that we have to be able to be, I know I can do this. I can do this. I have no problem in telling somebody he's full of it, or she is, if she says or he says something that I don't care for. We have a little bit more time. I can't stand it. This is such a good thing. I have a friend who has been out in the world forever in her career. She's dealt with tons and tons of people, and she's had to move to another location because her place was too tiny. So obviously I invited her to live in Southfield. And this person, who's very well respected in the community, and she's very smart, went around Southfield, and she felt that it was too black for her. And I was seriously in shock, because she is a worldly person in many ways. And I didn't smack her, because she's been a good friend. But I just said, I'm disappointed. I am disappointed. So I see it in people that I never thought they would act that way. So I leave you to answer me.
Well, I have seen over the years people were told not to come to Southfield, the businesses.
Yes.
Sue Goldstein and I on city council would go to businesses and say, please do not tell people, your employees, when they transfer, not to come to Southfield. But they were telling them that.
Charming.
There are studies that have been made that if one black moves into an area, people start raising their brows. If 2 or 3, and then pretty soon it goes to be all black and no white. Well, in Southfield, when I look over the statistics in Southfield, I was one of the 200 that moved to Southfield. And I have seen the migration of whites moving. They move out to West Bloomfield.
Yes, they do.
Not only whites, but blacks also, because it gets too black for them.
Fabulous.
So
Fabulous.
And we had, at one time, after I got off a city council, we formed a group, and I was really chided for being part of the group, and I was the director of it, that we would try to provide ways for blacks to move, to move in like West Bloomfield, and whites to come back.
That's the Shaker Heights.
Shaker
that
Heights.
You and I
yes,
talked about.
That's right.
Sure.
But I was not called real nice things at that time. But at any rate, there has to be that people have to feel good living
Of
together.
course they do. I can't be that judgmental. Shame on moi. I have to behave.
There's a revolutionary in a revolution there's in the 60s by the name of Saul Alinsky, and most of the time you'll hear about him because it's the political election, and no one really knows what he's done, but it sounds like a bad person. But one of the things he had said was that the definition of a black community is when an integrated community is between the time the first black move in and the last white move out. And so that's
Isn't that wild?
but in my neighborhood, one of the things that's happening is the houses that are being purchased by non-whites, and I'm seeing more and more of an investment in places like the synagogues and things. So what I see is a gentrification almost sounds like a negative. I don't see that, but I don't see Southfield's population remaining the same. I see it changing in another direction, which would be unique for any urban city. And again, Southfield, I think, is one of those unique communities.
Who do you say is moving into the houses? You said non-white?
Non-black.
Oh, okay, I thought you said non-white.
You actually
Okay.
said no.
Oh, so
Okay.
non-black. Okay, gotcha. Oh, okay.
So non-black people are now becoming my
gotcha.
neighbors,
Okay.
buying every available house in the neighborhood.
And they're moving in.
Yes.
That's the important piece.
And
Yes.
those
So I
because
think-
of religion. Because of religion.
So I
Yes.
think soon
Yay, synagogues.
we will again become a minority. I don't know if I've ever been majority. I will be for sure a minority within our community, probably in the next 5 or 6 years.
That'd be fascinating to see a turnaround like that.
I
know,
don't know of any
wow.
place
Yeah.
in history.
Yeah.
That's
I've heard
fascinating.
other people in other parts of Southfield. In fact, near me, around 10 Mile Road and Greenfield,
Oh, yes.
because of the synagogue, and people are Jewish people with the Jewish religion are moving in, buying homes.
If they're Jewish, they have that religion, yeah.
And they are being helped, I understand, by a certain union or something. Is that-
Probably an organization.
Sure.
How smart of them. They chose a good city.
Yes.
They chose a good city. So now we are pretty close to the end. This is good.
Can I say something, Uni?
Oh,
as you
you're
close?
allowed. Wait a minute. I will let you.
Ju-
Yes,
just
sir.
to close, I want to
Please.
say, first of all, it was great having this conversation. And I just want to applaud, these two folks here, you
gosh, yes.
and our Southfield community, for working with the police department. It's tense times right now, and there's
Horrible
just
times.
raw emotions that are out there. I don't think anybody's totally right. I don't think anybody's totally wrong on this. But for our community, to remain great, we have got to remain together. And what I'm seeing is overwhelming support from the community, and I'm seeing my officers who are going over and beyond to understand, or at least be aware of the issues that are out there, and to have an appreciation for it, so that they can work with our community during these tense times. So I applaud you, and I applaud the community, and I applaud my officers during this period of time.
Well, we know they're the best.
That's right. And we
We know
make
that.
tribute. We're going to have a
Yes.
tribute
Yes,
to
there
our
will be a
officers.
tribute,
Yes.
and I really, I thank you so very much for doing this with me, because this was an important issue. It will always be an important issue, and we can only hope that we live long enough to see things really make a complete turnover, where people can like each other no matter what they look like, and no matter how horrible they are, like Robert Willis.
and Uni, my hope is that we can maintain the hope. I think if there's any one thing that Detroit caused stress, and that was stop the robberies, is hope that at some point we can trust that this system is going to work. Because without it, if I can't believe that tomorrow is going to be better, I have nothing to lose today.
That's
you
true.
know.
Oh boy, that's a big one. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Robert. Thank you to all of you who are watching. You can find us on YouTube, so you have no excuse not to watch us if you don't live in Southfield. Thank you to my staff here at Channel 15. You always make me look good. Thank you for the staff here who make Southfield look good. Thank you very much. Take good care of each other. Remember, there really can be peace on earth if we work hard enough. Mwah!